On to item number 20, Finance and Budget Adoption of our fiscal year 2019 to 2028 Capital Improvement Program, Proposed Resolution R18-49. Mrs. Parat.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the board. I'm Mary Parat, Chief Financial Officer. Earlier today at the Finance, Audit, and Budget Committee meeting, proposed changes to the CIP were discussed, and I'll summarize those this afternoon. Computer, please. Who'd have the presentation, please? The short one. Thank you. As the board is aware, the CIP is a planning document, and before any projects can be implemented, further steps would be required. For example, if Fredericksburg Christian School were to be purchased, there would need to be an authorization to hold a public hearing. The public hearing would need to be held by the board, and after the public hearing, the debt could be authorized and funds appropriated. And after the completion of that process, the school board could move forward with the purchase of the property. So just wanted to make sure everyone is aware this is just for planning purposes, and other steps would be necessary to implement the CIP. The proposed CIP does meet the primary needs of the courts and schools for the next 10 years, which is the term of the CIP. A major adjustment was made to the court building, bringing the cost to about $40 million. The first phase addition to Fredericksburg Christian was moved out to FY25, and the second addition was removed entirely from the 10-year planning period. These changes reduce the operating costs and operating impact on the budget of the CIP, and it is well within the projected debt capacity limits. At the Finance, Audit, and Budget Committee, the committee did vote to recommend the proposal with two further changes. One would reduce the cost of the high school by $20 million. The other would eliminate the first addition to Fredericksburg Christian. Those projects are in future years and could be added back in or changed, modified, refined in future iterations of the CIP, which is, as you know, adopted every year. We have provided updated summary sheets and an updated resolution reflecting those changes by the Finance, Audit, and Budget Committee. And, of course, the original recommendation is in your package as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mrs. Parat? Ms. Maurer.
So, Ms. Parat, and I know you had to adjust the spreadsheet very quickly, but the original CIP, one of my major concerns is the total summary of budget impacts, line 106. There wasn't a change with the removal of Fredericksburg Christian or the reduction of $20 million for the high school. Am I reading that correctly, that that's probably maybe a formula error?
That line is an incremental change.
Okay.
So you'll see those changes reflected in earlier years. That last year, because the debt was eliminated sort of during the middle of the CIP, you'll see it in those years.
Okay.
These are incremental numbers.
Okay.
So the total impact is reduced, but the incremental numbers at the very beginning, at the very end, are unchanged. I questioned that same thing when I was upstairs working on this. So. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Parat?
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
So moved for the amended version that came
Okay.
out of the Finance Committee.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table and a second for the amended version, not the motion, not the package that's in your board packet. So that removes the phase one of the Christian school addition and reduces the high school by $20 million. Any discussion? Mr. Dudenheffer.
I'll continue to comment on this as in addition to the budget, but there's 0 road projects proposed in this capital improvement plan for the next 10 years. I repeat, 0. They've included a line now that talks about $1 million a year going into into the road project, but that money is not appropriated or guaranteed. It is end-of-year money that may or may not be available. And we've had years in the last decade where there was no money available. So you cannot plan for having that money. We will receive some additional funding based on the legislature's passing of a floor on the gas tax, but that also is a diminishing dollar amount as the expenses for the Virginia Rail Express increase. So the single biggest problem in the county of Stafford and our CIP or budget don't address them one bit. So I will be voting no on any of these. Thank you.
Would anyone else? Ms. Shelton?
Yes. One of the very interesting things I think that we've learned in the last few years is that our children are really basically formed by the time that they go to school. And we didn't know that a long time ago when we started building our schools 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so, in fact, this morning I was at a breakfast with the governor, and he talked about the vision for the Commonwealth to provide preschool for all children, not just the special needs children. And I really support that because, frankly, the scientific data supports that, and we can't ignore that data. And so one of our challenges as we see as we go forward is, what do we do about that? If we now know that all children need to be going to school earlier, then we need to have a vision for all those children. And one of those visions are, and we know very well that from just talking to our teachers, that children do better in their community schools. And so the vision for Stafford County that we should be building to is building schools that are capable of having pre-K in their communities in the future. We've talked to school board members and teachers who have informed us that there's a large increase, and some say exponential increase, in the number of individuals that need special services. So tying all those together, I think it's very important that we have a vision in Stafford County that we provide that capability for pre-K into our community schools. This CIP does not do that. And that's one of the reasons why I won't support it, is because I think here we have a responsibility to look to the future and build schools that match to what our needs are going to be, not pave a cow path that is what we currently have. Thank you.
Ms. Maurer?
All right. So a couple of things with this CIP. It's been a new process, and there has been some good and some bad with this new process. And the first thing I want to focus on is the good. And that is our staff. They have worked hard. I know they've put in a considerable number of extra hours. I know at our last meeting they felt a little dejected because, we asked them to go back, but there are two components that we need to look at in the CIP. Yes, it is a planning document. I get that. But the last CIP was planning for some significant tax increases. And that's when affordability then became the issue. And so I really appreciate the fact that they re-wickered the numbers. And they've also managed expectations on what money is available in order to do the new courthouse and do the high school, which is desperately needed in those out years. And so I am grateful for that, but it still is a planning document. So just because these numbers are here doesn't mean I'm going to, I'm not putting my stamp of approval that I'm going to appropriate these exact numbers as they are being presented. But I want to talk a little bit about the bad during the CIP process because it gives me considerable pause. And so during this process, I understand that there is emotions run high. People have their projects that they want to see approved, and I get that. But it is not good for public discourse and debate and open and honest communication when threats occur. And so there have been some interesting threats that I have received during this process, and I won't go into it. If you don't support X, we're going to vote against you. And one of the beautiful things about having cancer, and yes, I still have cancer, is that I don't know if I'm going to see my next election. And it gives me that I don't have a long list of I'm going to go to state delegate and then governor and then president. It's not in my plan. And so that gives me kind of a unique experience. But there's one threat that does need to be addressed. And Ms. McClendon, I received a call from one of the judges, and they had said that they had sought legal advice and that they were going to sue us. And that the only reason that concerns me, and I am not questioning anybody's integrity, but we've got a lot of cases before them. And to have this threat and them deciding Stafford County's future, it concerns me. And so I think we need to, we need to look into whether or not it's appropriate to have our cases being heard by the same people that are threatening to sue us. And so, Ms. McClendon, I would like you to see if there is an opportunity for that, because that does, I'm not questioning anybody's integrity, but the perception of that might give at least my constituents, and it does give my constituents, considerable pause. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cavalier?
This is my 15th CIP. By far the most expensive, by far the most work and deliberation that's ever been put into one. So for anybody to think that we didn't consider this thoughtfully, they're seriously remiss. And for a couple of the newer members, you weren't here for the beginning of it, I get it. But if you want a project put in there, you have to specify what project you want put in there, and it will be considered by the process. This was the first year of a joint process with the school board. It had some ups and downs. It can get better for next year, and hopefully it will, because I don't want to do another year like this. And I also want to say that almost all the projects in there are school related. So we do have recognized that need in the community. But there was one that I wasn't going to move off of, and it was the courthouse. And I believe that is a very critical component, and one that we have been delaying and delaying and delaying for such a long time that, I've taken the tour of our courthouse, and I've seen the inadequacies there, the lack of security, and then I go down and tour Chesterfield County's courthouse, and it's great. I don't think we're going to come up to Chesterfield in terms of that kind of facility. We've reduced our costs from over $60 million to just over $40 million for this facility. We've worked with Mosley Architects. We've worked with the judges. Our staff. Fred, in particular, has done a magnificent job here pointing out, really what we needed here and what was adequate. And I think we've fine-toothed this one and cut it as much as we could, yet to still make it useful. And so it was a compromise, and not everybody is ever happy with a compromise. But you see the opposite in the national level, what happens when you don't compromise. You get nothing. So rather than nothing, we're getting something, and hopefully it will be good, and we can all live with that and be proud of it. Thank you.
Mr. Cohen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting this CIP. First of all, many people have asked questions over the time I've been on here when we've gone over the budget, and we seem to go into one area with great meticulousness, wondering if we do that to everybody, and I think it's pretty clear that we do that to everybody. And staff will attest to that. One of the major reasons why I'll be supporting this CIP is because of Ferry Farm. And I don't think that's any surprise to the people up here on the board. First of all, I want to thank them for working with me. When I came onto this body, that was one of the things that I cared most about getting done. And so before I go any farther, I particularly like to thank the staff for their work on this. And then our last meeting, particularly Mr. Cavalier, Ms. Maurer, Ms. Baumke, and Mr. Snellings were very vocal and supportive of dealing with Ferry Farm. When I got on this board, Ferry Farm had not been dealt with in a decade, and the rebuild was going to be another decade. So that's 20 years. If you figure that from kindergarten through 5th grade is 6 years, that's 3 iterations of children that would be in a substandard building until it actually got addressed. I did not think that was appropriate. The people here 2 weeks ago saw that we can't afford everything, and I think that was very much clear that the idea of trying to do rebuilds and building new elementary schools and building everything that everybody wants was not possible. So the goal had to be doing something credible and realistic and meaningful for Ferry Farm and doing it ASAP. And this CIP does that, and I'm very, very appreciative of people's help in getting that. About a month ago, we had a joint meeting with the school board, and the sort of the feeling was, oh, we'll get to you and we'll deal with the CIP, sort of some issues with Ferry Farm, and trust us. And I held up the list of projects for this summer, and there was nothing for Ferry Farm. And thanks to members of this board and members of the school board, most notably my counterpart on the school board, Mr. McCosker, but also Dr. Chase, Ms. Healy, and Ms. Young, we really kept the pressure on. So two major things have happened for Ferry Farm, and I'm sorry, I'm going to harp on this. One is we have gotten real issues dealt with in real terms. So what that means is that this summer you're getting issues dealt with the gym / cafeteria. Next year, when they start looking at lights for all the various schools, Ferry Farm is at the top of the list now, where before it was somewhere maybe on the bottom, if on there at all. And I thank Ms. Maurer for really helping with that one. Also, by taking those other items off the list and addressing them, that means that the $10.8 million, which will happen in 2019 and 2020, not a decade from now, but a year or two from now, will be real renovations. And anybody who's looked at our package has seen that what they're looking at is at the older part of the building. To address that, there's only a handful of classrooms, there's an antiquated library, and for those of us who toured almost all the schools in the county, there's basically a 4-foot gap between the floor that you stand on and the real bottom of the building. 4 foot might be enough for me to walk around in, but it really is not enough to put storage or do anything with. And so the proposal that has come forward is to actually do something meaningful, a 2-story addition, replacement of that element with a meaningful library, replace the classrooms, maybe get additional capacity, which I know Mr. Cavalier has long been advocating for, as well as dealing with the things that are in that building. And then the other items are going to be addressed as they have been for other school systems and other schools in this system. So I am very much appreciative of that, and I understand that maybe it might be more, and I think that in going over it between our subcommittee and now, I think by pulling off the the addition to the, what I like to call the Northern Education Campus, the formerly Fredericksburg Christian School, will give funds available if we need it to do some more work on Ferry Farm. This does deal with transportation. There have been 2 times when I've had an opportunity to vote on giving more money for transportation, and I'm proud to say that I've voted on both of them, even though they don't necessarily help my district. Is it 100%? No. But am I getting 100% on Ferry Farm? No. We'll all have to make compromises. The courthouse, I think the plan that has been brought forward meets their needs. It's not ideal. However, we should stop kicking the can down the road. We should deal with it in a more meaningful way. And I'm very impressed and proud of the staff for taking what at one point was a near $70 million project and looking at it and knocking it down and looking it into phases to make it realistic so that you can build into it, so that the proposal is a 4-story building, but then you build courtrooms into the 4th floor, as opposed to, yes, next, maybe future we'll do something. So I'm very proud of what the staff has been doing on that. I personally believe that the purchasing of the Northern Education Campus is not rational if you don't do an addition. I said that when they first talked to me. School board members said, no, we want to build a brand new school. And I kept saying $8 million for an addition versus $40 million for a new school doesn't make sense, and we can't afford this. But however, we need to have a CIP. And so I think that, quite honestly, the school system has promised us that if they get this complex, they will redistrict. And so hopefully they will honor that commitment. And personally, I don't see any reason why we should be rushing to do elementary school 18 if they don't follow through with Dr. Chase's analysis and look through what the needs are, and if they need to do an addition to that complex, do the addition and come forward with it next year. And I also happen to agree with Mr. Cavalier had brought forth the idea, actually I think I did 2 weeks ago, of knocking $20 million off the high school, in part because of several members concerned about the cost and the impact to our tax rate, but also, quite honestly, when Ms. Shelton and I thank Ms. Shelton for this, went with Ms. Young and met with Mr. Haran about high school number 6, the discussion was that we're looking at a new floor plan. We're not using the same old floor plan. And a lot of this 141 million that was initially there was based on the old floor plan. So now when we're going into a new floor plan, we can do one that is within the 121 million. So I think that gives them an idea of what to go from. And I thank Ms. Shelton for arranging that meeting as well. So I will be supporting this, and I hope that in a year or so we put in the addition to the Northern Education Campus, unless we want to call it the Pam Kale Center. And I hope that we will get the CIP through, because I want to see Ferry Farm dealt with in a meaningful way, and I'm very thankful for staff for helping this.
Okay, I believe everybody has spoken. I would just like to say that I am going to be supporting this CIP, and I am compromising. I really would like to see, and I've talked to my colleagues about this, I really would like to see the first phase of the Christian school in the capital improvement plan. I also would like to see more money to Ferry Farm. I look back at the additions we did at the other 3 elementaries, Grafton, Ferry Farm, and Falmouth Elementary, not Ferry Farm, Stafford Elementary, Falmouth and Grafton. Those schools all cost $18 million plus, and that's been 3.5 to 5 years on some of those projects. And if you add in the cost of inflation and the cost of steel and everything, I think we're going to be, that we are woefully underfunding Ferry Farm. But that's my personal opinion. I do believe, and if you compare this agenda package that the county administrator, along with our budget and finance department, put together compared to previous years, it's the best that we've ever seen. So thank you for your leadership, Mr. Foley, in looking at all the different revenue sources and working with Maria and Andrea Light in budget and finance, because this really, you did an outstanding job. And we realize that, whenever you start any kind of a new process, there are always going to be bumps in the road. I know Ms. Kale, acting superintendent, was over here just the other day working with our staff on, our improvements that we're going to be making in this upcoming year. So that's great. We're already working on it. So with that, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Please cast your vote. Tally the vote. The CIP passes 5-2. Thank you.